Hey folks, I'm Private Hudson, and this is Always Sometimes Monsters, created by a tiny new studio called the Vagabond Dogs, and published by the ever so awesome Devolver Digital. Always Sometimes Monsters is a game I immediately fell in love with, mostly because of how much I could relate to the story. The game starts off with a flashback sequence. You're an aspiring writer in a wonderful relationship, and you just got yourself a fantastic contract from a publisher. Life couldn't possibly be any better. Fast forward shortly into the future, and you're single, you're broke, you're unemployed, your manuscript has had no progress whatsoever, you get evicted because you cannot pay your rent, and now you're homeless. To add more fuel to the fire, you receive an invitation to your ex-girlfriend's wedding. Now, life couldn't possibly be any worse. The wedding is 30 days from now, and is on the other side of the country. You don't know how you're going to get there, but your only goal right now is to stop that wedding. As I said before, I can relate to this story very well. While I've never drove across the country to prevent a wedding, I know how it feels like being worthless and being too depressed to do anything about it. My ex and I, we were together for 2.5 years. When she broke up with me, I was devastated. I honestly couldn't deal with it. At the time, I worked at Staples, and my job was scamming people by convincing them to buy overpriced, worthless warranties. Every retail job is horrible, but this one was one of the worst. So I literally felt like the only positive thing I had in my life was gone. The only thing that motivated me to keep going, to better myself, disappeared. I began binge drinking every day non-stop for a month and a half. The last day of this, marathon, I guess you can call it, I was at a concert, drinking of course, and my body just gave out on me. I blacked out, I woke up at home and my right foot hurt like hell. The next day I went to the hospital and found out I fractured my ankle. I had surgery a week later, was hospitalized for 3 days, and had to wear a cast for 4 months. Afterwards, I had 2 months of physical therapy. Basically, I couldn't walk for half a year. Obviously, I lost my job, I gained weight because I couldn't walk. 6 months gone just like that, while the real world kept going on in the background, with my credit card and student loan debt ever increasing. It was the worst experience of my life, but at the same time, it was an incredibly powerful lesson. Never be self-destructive over losing someone. It's not worth it. As horrible as it was, I needed it, as it was a good wake-up call. So yeah, that's how I can relate to the story. I shaped my character to be as similar to myself in this kind of situation. Sadly, there's no real character creation. Instead, during the introduction of the game, at the publisher's dinner party, you select yourself and your love interest from a cast of characters. Now, the only thing that this decides is your character's gender, appearance, and sexuality. You define your own personality as the game goes on. I thought this was pretty neat, how you're able to walk around as the publisher and talk to and get to know all your various guests, then pick the main characters for the story, but I still would have preferred being able to customize my character's appearance. I always try to make my character look like myself, long hair, beard, glasses, but there was no one here, sadly, that fit the description. So I picked the most angriest, most depressed looking character from the bunch. At least he had a beard, I guess that fits 1/3 of the description. As far as my love interest is concerned, I didn't use my ex or any of my ex's names, as that would just piss me off and would have gave me no motivation of stopping their weddings. I know some women watch my reviews, some that I personally know, and I don't want to give anyone the wrong impression, so I sat there for 15 minutes trying to come up with a female name of someone that I've never met or have ever known, and I finally ended up on Isabel. Always Sometimes Monsters is a 2D adventure game created using the Game Maker engine. There's barely any real gameplay to speak of. The game follows a time-based system, and time only progresses after you've finished working or after an event has occurred. Your goal is to pretty much get from one town to the next one, but there's always some sort of obstacle in the way that you need to clear. In between completing those objectives, you can do odd jobs at the employment office. As time passes, hunger increases, so it's important to keep your character fed, or you risk dying of starvation. As you complete these various objectives, you are met with choices and dilemmas. While initially I was excited at the thought of branching storylines and your decisions having consequences, unfortunately I quickly realized that the developers decided to go the BioWare and Telltale route of things. There aren't really any diverging paths as the Devolver Digital website advertises, and for the most part, the further you get into the game, the more disappointing it becomes. The first city you're in has a number of things to do. Once you get evicted, you get 2 job offers at the same time, and they are both mutually exclusive. There are several more additional side quests you can find. Afterwards, 2 more job offers that once again are mutually exclusive pop up, and then you get another mission. In the second city, there's only one main storyline and 1 side quest. There's 3 factions in the storyline who have mutually exclusive missions, but their quest lines are very short. In the third city, there's no side quests whatsoever. There's no employment office where you can go to do extra work. There's only 1 mission line, and it's even shorter than the previous one. The fourth city isn't even a city at all. As you can see, the further you get into the game, there's less and less diversity, and more linearity. What makes this even worse is that the cities are practically dead. There are almost no inhabitants. I've seen more NPCs in RPGs for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. No one is ever at any bar, restaurant, convenience store, or anything. The only building that ever has any people in it is the coffee shop, where the two lead developers thought it was a clever idea by putting themselves in their own game. It feels extremely stupid having a junkie ask you to go buy drugs for her so she doesn't lose her place in line for the nightclub when there are only 2 people in the line. If you get invited to the Union Clubhouse, you're told this is where all the big union leaders come down to unwind and relax, and how there's always work to be found there. Yet the clubhouse is always empty. The most hilarious thing about this is, you end up couch surfing as you go from city to city, but the owner is never home unless they have a mission for you. This makes no sense whatsoever. It could be in the middle of the night and they're still not at home, sleeping. The almost complete lack of side events and things to do make this game very boring at times. As previously explained, time only goes by when you finish working or an event moves forward. Here's when things get complicated. Someone tells you to meet them in the evening and it's currently the afternoon. The bus to the next city leaves at night, but it's currently the evening. Well, since there's nothing to do in town, you're forced to go to the employment office and do work just to pass the time. And these jobs are so fucking boring. Do you remember the forklift sections in Shenmue? Well, in this game you do things like that regularly, either to make money or just to pass the time so you can trigger the next story event. These minigames are so mind-numbingly dull. You do stupid shit like calculate the correct amount of tofu to create fucking tofu products, pack bags of marijuana, plant fucking seeds for crops, move boxes around. Later on there's a hacking game. It's the same shit as Frogger and each layout is exactly the fucking same. How dull is that? Thankfully the game is saved by the story and dialogue, which I loved for the most part. What I like about the game is when you start out as the player yourself, not the character you're playing, you have no idea how your relationship has ended. As you finish certain storyline missions, you get flashbacks. In these flashbacks, you yourself define how your relationship began, as well as how it ended. These are amazingly done, except for the breakup, which is way too short and so anticlimactic. Also, for some strange reason, the last hour or so of the game is full of spelling errors. I don't get it. I realize that it may not be technologically feasible or economically possible for such a team to create branching storylines in a $10 game. Well, with that said, they shouldn't advertise it as such to begin with, but at the very least, they should be able to proofread their own work. The endings, I believe there are around 4 of them, are way too short, abrupt, and also anticlimactic. Right before the ending, there are several absolutely amazing, unimaginable sequences that occur, and what you end up seeing at the end, if you do decide on buying and playing through the game, does not justify those sequences. It's really disappointing, as the game's around 10 hours long. You spend the majority of that time doing the unthinkable to get your ex's wedding, only to have a very short conclusion. The game and its NPCs keep prattling on about choices, decisions, and answering and living for their consequences. The problem is that your choices honestly do not really matter. There's little diversity in your gameplay experience if you do decide to replay it. The difference between playing the game as a white male and playing as someone who is black or gay or lesbian is even smaller than having Commander Shepard be ruthless or a war hero. You may have some very slightly different lines of dialogue, but the game will continue playing out in the same exact way. I originally thought the game was supposed to be about self-preservation. I thought it would be about dealing with difficult dilemmas, making hard choices, and having to live with them. But that isn't really the case, as taking the moral high ground is very easy in most circumstances. Early on in the game, I'm tasked with what appears to be a difficult decision. A close friend is a junkie and needs to go to rehab, but they can't afford it. Do I give them $300 so they can get help and fix their life? Or do I keep it because I need that money for my trip across the country? In a real-life scenario, I would keep it, but in this game, I gave it to them. Why? Because I can just go to the employment office, make some shitty fucking tofu food for as long as I want. You can make as much as you want, and time will only pass once you decide to leave. Not only that, but they implement a fate system. You can see this number on your save game screen. This is basically your luck when it comes to fishing and gambling. If you have high enough fate, you can just fish the city dry and have more than enough food. You can then go into a pawn shop and buy as many lottery tickets to your heart's delight and make money. The $300 I gave to my friend I made back in 20 minutes. This isn't what difficult decisions are. While I did do quite a bit of fucked up shit in this game, I mean it is a dark game after all, and I did get various people killed, it was mostly under anger or the belief that they deserved it. Not because I had to do what I did. Whenever I play these types of games, I really need to restrain myself from playing them in the most efficient way possible, and play them in the way I would act in these circumstances. But at the same time as I'm restraining myself, I'm having less fun, and that's because I believe that all playstyles should be valid, and have equal value in the game. One of the last things I want to focus on is the humor, and how out of place some of it is. This game has death, rape, drug abuse, racism, homophobia, etc. It's very dark and very tragic. Then you run into some kid who marks good fishing spots with the letter FK, you know, fuck. Fuck. Why? Because his nickname is Fishing Kid. Very fucking clever. Also, developers who put themselves in the game try to be funny but fail every single time. They either make jokes about the development of the game, because as the story is taking place, the developers are creating the game, and ask stupid things like, oh, are the people gonna enjoy these graphics, or what do you think about this idea, or should we make a tutorial? Like, no, tutorials are bad, let the player figure things out on their own. They also try to foreshadow things, such as in the beginning when you're briefly playing as Larry. In order to select the main character, if you speak to the developers, they ask you, how would you feel if you were the main character of a game? In a way to convey to the player that Larry is not the protagonist. The only funny moment is when you enter their offices, break into their safe, and steal $50 from their safe. You lose with a game over screen since you stole their money that they were putting into the development of it. Always Sometimes Monsters is a mixed bag. The concept is brilliant, but the execution isn't very good. It starts off with a lot of interesting mutually exclusive objectives, only to completely drop them in favor of linearity. The cities are devoid of life, and there's nothing to do whatsoever. The way you create and break up your relationship through flashbacks is an amazing idea, but the breakup part is short and anticlimactic. The final hour of the game is unbelievable, and builds itself up to what should be an explosive finale, but the game ends quickly, quietly, and abruptly. The mini-games you perform to complete various jobs are dull and boring. On a positive note, the soundtrack is phenomenal. It's a mixture of good old retro gaming music as well as 80s synth pop. The story and dialogue are also very good for the most part. With all my criticisms, I still really enjoyed this game, but that's probably because of my past and how I feel connected to the story. If you've ever truly loved someone, lost them, and was miserable afterwards, then I do recommend this game for you, as you can probably relate to it. If not, then I don't recommend it. As the pacing is slow, the progress is tedious due to the amount of mini-games you have to trudge through, and the endings don't really leave you satisfied. I only wish there were more games like this. Games that focused on telling a semi-realistic story of love, loss, and human emotion. Always Sometimes Monsters is an interesting, albeit very limited experience. I only wish there was more to it.